and see you after the session.
So the countdown. At 20 seconds now?
I'll text you on YouTube. Meant WhatsApp.
Good evening and welcome to all our viewers who are attending today's session hosted by Dar Arab for Publishing and Translation, the first and only press exclusively dedicated to translating contemporary Arabic literature into English. My name is Arwa Hinai. I'm a lecturer of Humanities and Social Sciences at the at the Modern College of Business and Science in Muscat, Oman. It gives me great pleasure to be your moderator as we explore the fascinating intersections of literature, history, and translation. Today, we have two exceptional guests with us who have significantly contributed to the literary and academic landscape. We have Professor Roger Allen with us and Dr. Reem Bassiouney. We will be engaging in an exploration of the Halva-Maker, a critically acclaimed novel published in 2024 that has gained international recognition. Our discussion will delve into the book's masterful weaving of historical themes. Our discussion will delve into the book's masterful weaving, as I said, of historical themes, compelling character development, and profound cultural insights. Recently awarded with the prestigious Sheikh Zayed Book Award, this literary masterpiece has now reached a global audience through Professor Roger Allen's skilled translation. We invite you to participate in a thoughtful examination of this exceptional work of contemporary fiction and its significance in modern literature. I would like to welcome our guests, Professor Roger Allen, a world-renowned translator and scholar of Arabic literature. Professor Allen, who completed the translation of the Halva-Maker, along with many other novels, just before the Sheikh Zayed Book Award announcement, has played a pivotal role in introducing modern Arabic literary works into the English-speaking world. His careful translations ensure that the nuances, cultural depth, and voice of the original text remain intact, something we will be discussing in our session today. We also have with us Dr. Reem Bassiouney, an award-winning author and professor whose literary works span across fiction, historical narratives, and sociolinguistics. Dr. Reem's novel, The Halva-Maker, won the Sheikh Zayed Book Award, marking her place as a leading voice in Arabic literature. Her works often explore the complexities of identity, language, and history, offering profound insights into the human condition. And so, without further ado, let us delve into the wonder of Egyptian history and its representations in literature as we embark on this exciting discussion. Thank you to Dr. Allen and Dr. Reem for being with us today. My first question is directed to Professor Allen. I am interested in knowing how you came about and decided to translate the Halva-Maker.
Well, that's a story with quite a history, because I have to confess that, in fact, it is the fourth of her novels, her historical novels, on which I've worked. And as you may know, Dar Arab currently has a fifth in preparation, and I am currently translating a sixth. So I am indeed quite familiar with Reem Bassiouney's works, her treatment of history, her amazing ability to combine extremely accurate accounts of the historical events which are part of the time periods in which she sets her work, but also her ability to humanize the broader dimensions of history, politics, and society by introducing a large number of extremely interesting characters, some of them directly based on the actual participants in the events concerned, but many of them, I think, unless I'm wrong, creations of her imagination. And I would apply that particularly to the extremely interesting, important, and influential female characters whom she introduces into all her narratives. But I started off, just briefly to say, Awlad al-Nas, Sons of the People, is set in the Mamluk period. Sabil al-Ghariq is the first of her explorations of Sufism and the image of drowning and diving, which is part of that tradition, which is in fact, as I only discovered when I reached the last page of the novel, a really quite factual account of the life of Galila Thabit, who was in fact the first girl, woman to get an education, well, from the upper classes, as it were, to get an education and then to become a teacher, but also radically concerned with the British invasion of the interim period after 1879 and the actual invasion of 1882 and its consequences. And then Al-Qata'a, very much concerned with Ibn Tulun and his period and the building of the world famous mosque. And I still remember, with reference to that, looking up the word Ara'is and discovering I didn't quite know what brides had to do with this building. And I was very interested to discover there is not a single English dictionary that actually says that the word also means crenulations in the architectural context, which is what it says, but that it appears to be an image which tries to reflect bridal couples hugging each other and forming these kinds of structures. But to say, having done those three, it was really a no-brainer for me when Reem let me know about Al-Hawani to decide that I'd translate it. And I remember from the very earliest time, I was quite insistent on retaining the idea of halwa or halva in English rather than what very people were recommending, which is other terms like confectioner or something. I said, no, there's a very strong concentration in this novel on the halwa, how it's made. I mean, if you've read the novel, you know there are all sorts of menus and descriptions, and indeed Reem has even supplied an appendix with the various types of halwa. So as I say, with that history behind me, 3 novels already translated, this one, particularly with its themes, the advent of Shia Islam to Egypt, the building of the old city of Cairo, the absolutely disastrous reign of Al-Hakim, and the Crusades, put all that together, and you know, it was really, for me, a no-brainer to begin translating it. And I have never regretted doing it. I have to say, it is a truly wonderful piece of work.
I totally agree. I would like to ask Dr. Reem the same question. What drew you to Dr. Roger Allen, and what was the process that led him to translating your novels? Because as Dr. Roger mentioned, this is the 4th one, but there are actually 6 coming out. So far he translated Sons of the People, Sabil al-Gharaq, which is Fountain of the Drowning, Al-Qata'a, and now this one. So why Dr. Roger Allen?
To be honest, I'm extraordinarily lucky that Dr. Roger Allen, agreed to actually translate my work. I think this is a great honor. I have read a lot of his translations a long time ago, and I was always like dreaming that one day he will translate any of my novels. So when he, agreed to translate first of all Sons of the People, it was for me a dream come true, to be honest. And since then, working with him for me is actually a learning experience. To find someone who masters the language so incredibly. He corrects my Arabic sometimes when we are, even him, because first of all, he's the first reader. usually. And even before it gets published in Arabic, in most of the novels, he was actually my first reader. So we sort of, developed this very close relationship as well, because he as a very, very attentive and extraordinary conscientious and diligent reader, sometimes he would pick up things that I would not even notice when I am writing, a kind of mixture of names, or, an event that was it. So it was a kind of really, really wonderful partnership that I think of myself as extraordinarily lucky and honored to have. And as I don't know whether you're speaking about the afterwards before I arrived, but I can tell you that I look very much forward to his afterwards. Always, once he finishes the translation, I always send him an email. Please send me the afterwards. I very much want to read it, because it's not just it's not a reflection or even a summary. It's a big addition to the work. And I think a translator who's incredibly talented would add to the work, would add wealth and a kind of a spirit to the work. And this is something that he does, of course, extraordinarily.
Professor Allen, based on the translations that you've done so far, what do you think, or what would you say? And you mentioned something now, the term arais. There isn't an equivalent to it in the English language. So what is the challenge that you face sometimes when translating such novels, especially historical fiction, and something that has to do with Egyptian identity, Egyptian history, Egyptian culture? So are there any challenges that you face that you feel like, okay, I need to stop and kind of read more about and maybe discover more in order to be able to convey the meaning that these words really mean and how the author wanted to convey them?
Yes. In short, yes, frequently I consult other sources to try and provide some context for what's going on. But I want to withdraw a bit and simply say that among the things I used to teach was the theory of translation. And there's basically beginning in the latter half of the 20th century, there was a large increase in theoretical writings about translation. But the thing which I rely on most is a quote from a German philosopher of the 18th to 19th century, Friedrich Schleiermacher, who says, a translator has a choice between domesticating the text and foreignizing the reader. In other words, domesticating the text means you try to eradicate all the difficulties or differences between two cultures and two languages and make it, quote, easy, unquote, for the reader to read. That is absolutely opposite of what I try to do. I believe the reader of translation has to be confronted with difference and, indeed, difficulty. That reading the text is not supposed to be made easy. If you want an easy text, you can read some cheap novel on the bestseller lists in the United States. But that's not what, for me, the purpose of translation is not that. It is indeed to show cultural differences and thereby to engage in differences. What I meant by arais actually was not that there isn't a word for it, but there is a word in English which is, I discover, is either crenellation or crenulation. But my point is that I have online 6 Arabic dictionaries. None of them listed that as a translation of arais. None of them even had anything. It's all about brides and stuff. Indeed, translating historical novels in particular poses the additional challenge. And you could go all the way back here to Georgi Zaidan, who incidentally I've also translated one of his novels about Spain, which is to be aware of the fact that there are historical accounts which aren't allegedly non-fictional, although we can get into all sorts of discussions along theoretical lines today about fiction and non-fiction. I'm reminded of Hayden White, who has this spectrum from history, biology, history, biography, autobiography, fiction as a direct spectrum. And that fiction, I think it's David Shields has a book about reality saying, fiction is not necessarily all that fictional very often. And of course, in the historical novel, we have what's the historical record, of course, in quotes, however accurate that may be itself. And incidentally, one thing I point out in my afterwards to this book is that the Western accounts of the Crusades is a virtually total distortion about the events which actually happened and the attitudes behind them. And there are several modern works now. I mentioned Carol Hildebrand and Paul Cobb in the afterwards as writing things which radically transform our understanding of what the Crusades were. But you've got to be aware of the historical background, shall we say, and then endeavor to reflect what you discover, but in a language of today that the Anglophone reader will be able to read and interpret. And that transfer process, translation is, of course, is my classical background coming in, trans, across, late, carry. So it's the process of transfer from one language to another. That process, not only of transferring language, but transferring it into a contemporary language, which will be interesting, acceptable, if difficult for the reader of English. That is what makes the project interesting and challenging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Reem, you combine between, or you've written about Egyptian architecture, and now you've switched a little bit to Egyptian sweets. What is the relationship between these two, in your opinion? What role do they play in shaping Egyptian culture and Egyptian identity?
I think that's a very important question, because what I was really interested in is the kind of creation behind buildings and behind, for example, the Mosque of Ibn Tulun or the madrasa and the school and the mosque of Sultan Hassan. It was really the spirit of the creator that I was interested in, the energy and the kind of incredible talent that was behind such buildings that became eternal in a way. They are there to remind us of the history of these people. But then I thought that it's not just buildings that deserve to be written about. It's also other kinds of creations, like making sweets, making desserts, or creating a different kind of dessert or a sweet that people are still using up until today. So now we have Mawlid al-Nabawi coming, the birth of Prophet Muhammad, and we are still thinking about the legacy of the Fatimids and their Halva-Maker and the kind of doll that is made of sugar, and the horse and the horseman that are made of sugar. So we're again remembering this Halva-Maker, who in a way created something that is eternal, even though it is made of sugar. So what I was interested in is the creator, and how, if you really are sincere, you have a talent, you can create something that will live for a long time.
Mm-hmm. I just want to go back again to the element of history, Professor Allen. How did you handle concepts or terms, and I mentioned this just now, and you actually answered this question, that don't have equivalents in English? So how do you think, or did this impact the novel's accuracy?
As I say, faced with the task of transferring terms from one language to another, obviously I search for an English equivalent of some kind, but faced with the lack of such terms, I will frequently simply transliterate the Arabic term and leave it at that. Then the question becomes, and publishers are quite fussy about this. Do you have footnotes or don't you? I don't like footnotes, but do you have appendices of various kinds, or do you simply transliterate? I mean, a word, for example, like Amir. I will habitually simply use Amir rather than Prince, because it's really, Prince doesn't really capture everything which Amir is saying. You know, you've got, and obviously English has a sultan, right? Sultan. Okay, fine. And the various, interesting are the various terms that are used to describe God in Arabic. I mean, there is Allah, but there's also Rab, there's also Malik, there are a whole variety of different terms used to describe the Almighty. And there's the question about what I normally do in that case is to capitalize whichever one of the terms I use to indicate what the person or the entity I'm talking about. But I'm not afraid about simply including Arabic terms if I don't think that there is an appropriate English term which will convey the same notions, because frequently, even with a single term, those notions that were like Amir are so different in their different dimensions within the source culture that it's very hard to imagine that you could find a single term to cover it all. So translation is always going to be a challenge. And there are, as I say, going back to theory, there are a variety of different ways of dealing with it, depending on what you think the purpose of translation is. But as I say, I edge towards fidelity to the source culture as far as that is possible. And the strategies you therefore use when you are translating will depend on that principle.
Mm-hmm. But when you translate, Professor Allen, who is the target audience? Is it someone who has some kind of background with the cultural elements of the novel? Like when you say Amir, do you feel like there's a necessity to kind of explain it through the context, or do you feel like the reader would understand the difference between Amir and Prince, or Malik and King? Does it come down to the translator or the writer to convey the meaning?
Well, you're raising there an interesting question which has a lot of theoretical background to it. In other words, am I talking about the virtual reader, or am I talking about how many copies the book sells according to where it's published and how it's projected? I would say that in general, I'll repeat what I've already said. I don't want to make things easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to make things accessible at the expense of an accurate reflection of the original culture and the original text. And that may, in fact, restrict the readership. But I don't think I'm prepared to say that it's exclusively, say, an academic readership that I'm considering. I would hope it will be a more general readership. But then we get into a topic which I've written about at great length, which is the readerships for various types of fiction and the difference in those readerships even within Western societies. I've written an article pointing out that the French readership for Arabic literature is almost twice as large as any other European language, and has been for a very long time. Italian is catching up largely. Well, this is largely thanks to my own colleagues in Europe. As you may detect, I am of European origins, but that we have endeavored to translate into a variety of different cultures. And the readerships in those cultures are themselves very different, with perhaps the Anglophone readership close to the bottom when it comes to receptivity. I mean, I tend to feel very frequently that Arabic literature, particularly in translation, is a flyover zone for most Western book reviews, for example. So that becomes an issue. But between the virtual reader and the actual reader, that's an area where that can be a great deal of discussion. I'm hoping my virtual reader does indeed at least have an interest in the source culture and may be sufficient to indulge in some further investigations of what they don't understand. But when it comes to the actual reader, that becomes far more problematic.
Mhm. And Dr. Reem, the historical themes and cultural references, for example, in the Halva-Maker. And I'm also interested, sorry, the two questions. Professor Allen, why did you choose to write the Halva-Maker and not the Halwa-Maker? Why with a V and not a W? And then once you just give me a small explanation for this, then I'll move forward with Dr. Reem's question.
Well, basically, because, I mean, this is part of the discussion about what to call this. And I resisted a large movement not to use the term halwa or halva. I pointed out that halva is an English word. It exists. Halva exists. Halwa would be Arabic. Halva is a known quantity throughout the Middle East. So I decided to use what is, yes, an English term as a translation of the Arabic term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, I'll go back to Dr. Reem now. Do you think that your cultural references resonate with contemporary readers? Because obviously they do, but do you think that there are some lessons that we in our world today can learn from reading such novels?
I don't know about lessons, but I think once you start reading history, you find out that there is so many things that already happened, and that your life is not that interesting compared to the lives of these people, in the sense that you think there is, we have an epidemic. They had lots of epidemics and way, way worse. We have wars. They had really, really bad wars. And they know, as Roger was saying, the Crusades, and there was burning of cities and things, really destruction that was happening. There was defeat, there was victory, there was lots of love stories. So you find out that, as perhaps one of the characters said in The Sons of the People, that in a way, after reading history, you realize that you would feel safer, because anything that is happening to you, these things have happened before, and they happened on much greater scale. But also, to be honest with you, recently I have also discovered that we think that we have created so much knowledge in the last 200 or 300 years, but then you look into medieval scholars, and you discover that they have grappled with so many important and essential issues that we perhaps are still. I don't think even we can have these discussions now as much as they did in the past, with the same kind of eloquence and with the same kind of boldness in dealing and daring in dealing with lots of very controversial themes and controversial issues. So even the intellectual life that we think about, as we have created, different theories, we've created different ways of thinking. There has been lots of things that were happening already for a long time. So just by reading history, but reading history with a human eye, you discover that humans are humans after all. They have their weaknesses, they have their ambitions, they have their love, they have their hate and envy, all the kind of feelings that we all have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Professor Allen, when we last spoke, I asked you this question, but Dr. Reem wasn't present with us when we had our session on the beginning of this year almost. And I asked you about the importance of knowing the author when you translate their works. And you said that, yes, it was important. And you said that you usually get to know them. I asked you, do you get to know the author before or after translating their works? And you said no, that you prefer knowing them before and during the translation. So can you share your experience with collaboration with the professor or with Dr. Reem? How was the experience like?
Well, Reem's already sort of edged into that because in translating this novel and particularly the novel I'm translating now, which is extremely complicated. Maybe we'll talk about it a bit later, but I don't know. But it's no, the first novelist I got to know and work with happened to be Nagi Mahfouz, who I knew and worked with and who asked me to translate several of his works again before they came out, and I was in touch with him about them as well. So I published 6 of his books in English, but translation should, from my point of view, be a dialogue between the text and its author and the translator via the intertext process. And in every single case, I mean, I think, as I say, I forget where it is in one of my articles, I say the only author I have not known and worked with was Muhammad al-Mulhi, who happened to die in 1930. So that was a bit early for me. But I was in touch with his nephew and talked even there about him. But every single work I've done in translation has been with the knowledge of, and indeed with the help of, the author in elucidating certain aspects of the original text. The one example I remember particularly is the Palestinian novelist Jabra Ibrahim Jabra, who, as I've frequently said, his English was better than mine. He was a Cambridge and Harvard graduate, and he wrote his first novels in English, and they were translated into Arabic. And with my colleague Adnan Haidar, we translated 2 of his novels into Arabic and sent them to him. And he sent them back with all sorts of comments in the margin, but says, "You're the translator, I wrote it, and I can make suggestions, but it's absolutely your job to decide whether you like my comments or not." And indeed, in his novel Al-Bahr al-Walid Mas'ud, he simply said, "Your translation is better than mine because I have 12 speakers in my novel, 12 chapters, 12 speakers. You took 6 each. And your voices are automatically different between the first translator and the second translator." So that's a specific and practical example of this larger issue of the translator being in touch with the author. And, as Reem said, we're constantly in contact about the text, because I've regularly received the texts of her translations before they're published in Arabic, including the one I'm now working on. And so, we can, if there are problems, then, they can be investigated. And it becomes a very important process for me as translator to know that the author knows that I'm doing the translation and is interested in it. And it's not just something where I've just gone off on my own and done something without any reference to the original author. So, I mean, that's my very specific goal and policy. Yes.
Dr. Reem, you mentioned in previous interviews that when you first published Awlad al-Nas, Sons of the People, you were hesitant about the number of pages, and that you were worried that people might not be ready to read that many pages in a novel. But then you continued writing Al-Qata and writing Al-Halawani, which are also hundreds of pages long. So what made you continue writing novels that are that long? And then I'll have another question that's related to translation for Dr. Allen. So could you share the reason that encouraged you to continue writing novels that were long and not stop at, say, 200 pages?
To be honest with you, I stopped. I wrote 5 novels and then I stopped writing for 7 years. And then I went back into writing with Murshid Siyahi and then Sons of the People. So I have learned throughout my writing career that I really have to write what I feel should be written. And I know that lots of readers really rely on me and ask me to, write certain things. And there are things I'm very interested in, but sometimes it's the idea that is really, buzzing in my ear, as I could say, that I just really have to write it. And when I'm writing about a long historical era, like the Tulunites or the Fatimids or the Mamluks, it's really difficult to be able to do this in 20 pages. It's not giving them their due because there's so much that has happened. So if we think about the Halva-Maker, for example, then we have almost 300 years. And then during the 300 years, think about every single thing that could happen have happened. The burning of Fustat, the building of Cairo, the building of Al-Azhar Mosque, the Crusades enter for the first time the Middle East, the fall of the Fatimids, different kind of factions and the conflict in Syria. So and it reflects on Egypt as well. So there's so many things happening. And of course, the big famine in Egypt, and the saving of Egyptians by the Armenian Badr al-Gamali. So there's so much that is happening that is really impossible to capture in 300 pages, but it also needs to be divided because you have the beginning of the times and how did this historical period form itself, and then you have after that the peak, what actually happened, what did these people do, and then you have the fall usually at the end. So there's always at least 3 parts, if not more, in order to give it its due and to be fair to the period that I write about.
Mhm. And I think you do a very good job. I think it's phenomenal what you do when it's not only a novel that someone reads to entertain themselves, it's also very informative. And I feel like for someone like me who hasn't studied, for example, the history of the Mamluks, reading about how, as you said, how the dynasty formed, how the period of their rule began, and then the peak, and then the downfall, it was very educational and also very informative, but also at the same time very entertaining to read because of the amazing stories that happen with the characters. And now my question to Professor Allen is, Dr. Reem wrote a almost 600-page novel. What guarantees the translator that the translation will be received by the reader, and if they will be willing, the reader, to read that many pages? What are you confident that the reader will go on for 600 pages, or do you feel like I'm just going to put it out there and see what happens?
Well, I mean, I've sort of addressed this issue about reception of translation already, particularly in the Anglophone world. And my basic thought is, if it's a good novel, it doesn't matter how long it is. War and Peace is not short, but everybody reads it. I wonder, I'm thinking, although I'm not sure I know enough about it, how many short historical novels there are. Of course, that depends partially on the length of the period you're discussing. And as Reem said, Al-Harani covers a very large swath of historical territory. I think, for example, of the novels again of Georgi Zaidan, which are certainly historical novels. But I mean, they subdivide. I mean, he literally decided in clusters of 3 to deal with a particular period in 3 separate novels. Reem's novels are regularly termed trilogies with 3 parts to them. In other words, that is a symbol of a mode of organization of the historical data into a particular fictional framework. And as I say, I think whether or not length plays a role in the context of translation, I think that's not very likely. But I go back and say, you know, in the Anglophone context, it's not very clear quite what that readership is.
Okay, thank you for that. And do you believe that historical fiction fosters cross-cultural understanding through translation? Does it bring people closer together, or does it divide people?
I don't think I know enough, but I don't think enough is known to be able to say yes or no in answer to that question. I would suspect that it doesn't bring about any particular antagonism, but I go back now to thinking that perhaps a fairly large percentage of the readership of these works will occur within an academic context rather than the general public readership. That's certainly a reflection of what I've seen in the United States, the adoption of novels by various teachers at universities for coursework. But there's a almost total lack of data to be able to say yes or no about that. I think that's a fair statement. No, as I say, the reviews of books, whether it's London, New York, or whatever, let alone the New York Times book review. I mean, I can't even remember the last time they reviewed anything by any Arab author translated into English, other than, of course, something about politics. But when it comes to literature, it's a total flyover zone, as I say. So if there, I don't think there exists much but data, but if there is, I don't know it.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Reem, do you think that your novels bring people together? Do you feel like learning about history can kind of change people's conception about, you know, different things? Historically, can it bring people together and make them realize that we do share common values, which we share common beliefs? Or does it?
I think that the person who's going to pick up this book specifically is someone who's ready to understand and to sympathize, and someone who's really is open-minded and tolerant. So in a way, I think that literature should be bringing people together, that literature is one of the things that we really depend on. It's an anchor for peace and for realizing that we are all very similar in our own way, and not necessarily that different from each other. There's nothing unique about anyone. We are really human after all. So I think this, in a way, I think literature does that in its own way, because it can surpass time and different cultures. Like you can read Shakespeare now and still feel sympathetic with certain characters, or you can read Jane Austen and you know, realize, okay, this is the mother and this is what a mother does, and this is, you know, the character. So it is possible for literature to do that, but you really need to open your heart and be ready to accept that. And I just want to mention that we were really lucky, Roger and myself, because the Times Literary Supplement did review Al-Qata'a translation. The translation by Roger Allen was reviewed at the Times Literary Supplement. That does not happen very often, unfortunately, but we were really lucky. It was the translation that was reviewed as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have a question from the audience here, and I assume it's for Professor Allen. How much do you try not to tweak meaning and especially sensations when you are a male translator voicing about 70% of characters that are females? What helps you most to transfer their emotions? And I agree with what you said, Professor Allen, about the very significant portrayal of female characters when it comes to Dr. Reem's novels. And I mentioned this in my thesis, and I always believe that whenever she describes her female novels, they are not physically only described. They are described in terms of personality, in terms of you know, how intelligent they are, their mind, it's not only how they look or what they appear to be, in front of others. So the question here is, as a male translator, how can you be accurate when you, describe or translate what these female characters are like? Is it difficult for you as a male translator to describe or to translate what female characters are like?
I don't think so, primarily because Reem does such an excellent job of placing her female characters into particular situations and making it very clear what their particular roles are. I think in this novel, for example, about Furun and her career, which is, my goodness, I mean, talk about ups and downs, getting sold as a slave girl, in a market. I mean, good grief.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to translating her sentiments into English, they are fairly clear on the page as far as I'm concerned. I don't regard myself as doing any, quote, tweaking, unquote. I just translate what is on the page into English and leave it at that and let the reader interpret the results the way they wish.
So you don't think that there's a difference when it comes to translating works that were written by male authors or female authors, or is there any certain way to approach the translation, or is it all the same? Because some people sometimes wonder, or sometimes some people, okay, based on my reading, sometimes some male writers, you can tell that it's a man who's writing this, and sometimes you can tell it's a woman who wrote this. As a translator, does it make any difference? Do you notice any difference in the style of writing, for example, or a writer is just a writer?
For me, it's exactly the same. I've translated Hanan Sheikh into English and some other female authors, Leila Abu Zaid in Morocco. They write what they write, how they write. And I, as a translator, translate what they write into English from the page to English without trying in any way to reflect the gender of the author. No.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My question now is to Dr. Reem and to Professor Allen as well. How has winning the Sheikh Zayed Book Award impacted your career and your approach to integrating cultural and historical themes in your future projects? Does this encourage you to continue writing historical novels? Are you going to continue in this path, or are you waiting for the inspiration to direct you?
I think it's always the inspiration that should direct. This is my opinion. Inspiration should really be directing any writer, nothing else. But to be honest with you, of course, I'm honored to have this Sheikh Zayed Prize. It's a very big one. It's an important one in the Arab world, and it also is a kind of gateway to get your name known outside the Arab world. But to me, it gives me also a big responsibility in its own way, because you feel like you really need to keep up the level of your novels without repeating yourself. Because that's another thing that one has to be careful not to do. And that's one thing that I always make sure that I'm not repeating the same themes. I'm not repeating the same kind of character. We have different characters and different themes. And, even if I decide to write historical novels, there should be a different theme altogether, or a different take to the ideas. So that's very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Professor Allen, do you have any thoughts on this prestigious award?
Well, as I think I've said, at the age of 82, I've been in retirement now for well over a decade. So, and indeed, as I tell my colleagues, I am no longer doing any literary research. I'm only concentrating on translation. And in fact, I'm only translating basically now 2 authors. One is Reem, and the other is Ahmed Tawfiq in Morocco. And as I've also intimated, and as Reem may want to tell you about, I am currently in the middle of translating novel number 6. So indeed, I think she's certainly been continuing. I am continuing to translate. What the future holds is Allahu A'lam, you know. But that's my posture at this point. I am about 2/3 of the way through the latest novel, which will, inshallah, be appearing in Arabic sometime soon.
Inshallah. And do you look forward to translating more historical novels? Do you find them something that you would like to continue doing?
Yes,
again?
Definitely. Yes.
And I look forward to reading those contributions.
Yeah.
And my final question for you is, do you have or do you feel that there is an emotional connection to the translated works that you've done so far? Can you describe the relationship that you have with the translation that you've done when it comes to, let's say, Dr. Reem's novels or other novels? Do you feel like there is a special relationship that you can describe?
I've just counted, actually, because somebody asked me. With Reem's latest, I've translated 56 Arabic novels into English, including 6 by Mahfouz, 4 by Ben Salem Hamish. So, I mean, each author I've known, each project has been a wonderful exercise in transcultural cooperation and indeed friendship. With basically every single novelist I've worked with. So from that point of view, definitely there is a linkage and a connection. But no, basically, when it comes down to it, it is a basic project of transfer from one culture to another. But I have always determined to do it in conjunction with the author, and that has, as I say, been a source of contact, friendship, and it's lasted now for a very long time. As I say, starting with Morelahi in 1965, but going straight on to Mahfouz, Abdurrahman Munif, Jabra Ibn Jabra, you know, and I can go on and on and on. And Reem is certainly one of the most recent, and I'm still in contact with Dr. Ahmed in Morocco as well. And all these have been wonderful relationships for me personally.
And Dr. Reem, can you share your connection to the works that you've published so far, specifically the history? I'm sure you have a bond with all your novels, but when it comes to the historical ones, because I believe those are the ones that gained regional and now global recognition. So how do you feel about it?
I think I usually feel very enthusiastic about all my work, and usually the new work is always taking up my mind because I want to make sure it's getting its due in publicity and people are reading it. But I think in general, perhaps going back to what Roger is saying, you do develop a very strong and a very important relationship with your translator, because if you as a reader read someone's work and you feel it and you understand it, there is already a big bond. There is already a very strong bond between you and your reader. So imagine it's not just your reader, it's someone who's translating what you want to say into a different language. I think it's a very special relationship. It's a very important relationship. And again, if it works very well, then it's a big luck to have. For me, of course, I am still fascinated with history, simply because every single day I discover something new. And I'm a researcher. So just looking at different sources and trying to pinpoint what actually happened, and discovering that, for example, for a long time, sources were not accurate about certain events or about certain characters, then, it's a very important thing to suddenly show why it's important to mention these characters. So if we look at the Halva-Maker, I know that in Egypt, we did not give a lot of attention to Badr al-Jamali, person who saved Egypt from the famine. And yet, he's such an important, complicated, and complex character that we need to write about. Same with Jawhar al-Suqali, who built Cairo. We know that he's the leader that built Cairo, but we don't actually know anything about his background, his life afterwards, what happened after he built Cairo. So these are all issues that I thought were really important. And especially once you start discovering new things that people did not necessarily know, or if you're breaking stereotypes. I think breaking stereotypes is, of course, one of the things that I really like to do and challenge myself to do. So especially about the Mamluks, there were so many stereotypes in Egypt about the Mamluks. You'd be surprised. There were intellectuals in Egypt that I sat with who would tell me, what did the Mamluks do? They only left these few buildings that are not important. I'm serious. This is like how shocking, unfortunately, people would think. So not realizing the kind of legacy and importance, not just in terms of architecture, but in terms of thinking and in terms of intellectual life and trade that the Mamluks left to us is already a problem that I was trying to tackle. So I think I would say that breaking the stereotype is one of the important aspects that I want to work on.
I agree, and you do break the stereotypes, and also you do convey lessons, and also, as I mentioned, your novels, Dr. Reem, are not only entertaining to read, they are very informative for someone who is not from Egypt, for someone who hasn't studied the Mamluk history. I found it very enlightening, and also I learned a lot while reading it. I'd like to thank you both for being with us today. I appreciate your time. It's really an honor and a privilege to be moderating the session with you. And as we wrap up today's session, we invite you to join us next week for another insightful discussion with Professor Roger Allen and His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Tawfiq. Thank you to our esteemed guests, and thank you to all the viewers who were with us today. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.